By mid-August, Michael Phelps had already won 5 gold medals in the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens, Greece. And he was certain that he was going to win another one as the 4x400 medley relay race was taking place in a couple of days. But he had a teammate by the name of Ian Crocker who wasn't so fortunate. He was fighting the flu the whole week, and as a result of that, he hadn't won any medals. But then, graciously, we see Phelps passing on swimming in the finals, and he allowed Crocker to take his place on that relay team. And when told of the gesture, Crocker nearly wept, and he said, "I'm kind of speechless. That's a huge gift that's difficult to accept, and it makes me want to go out and tear up the pool." Now, that doesn't mean rip it apart, but just go as fast as he could. And through his contribution, the United States team set a games record for that race. So the pursuit of self-denial probably doesn't appear on the top line of your to-do list. We don't want to deny ourselves of anything. We want to be Ian Crocker. We want to be the one on the receiving end of all of that. We don't want to be the Michael Phelps who is turning around and in self-denial giving to others. So today, I hope you'll learn from the Apostle Peter that the key to living the most fulfilling life is through self-denial. And one guy wrote this. He said, self-denial really means desire denial, to refuse to allow that internal screamer, the emotional child inside who shouts and stomps and demands his way, to actually have his way. For if this inner infant is made commander-in-chief, he will soon become a tyrant. Only a Christ-seeking, sin-avoiding life can lead to an abundant and fulfilling life. So that's what we're going to look at here today, because we've been going through the book of 1 Peter since the beginning of this year, and we've been going through verse by verse, and the title of that whole series is An Exile's Guide to Life. And we've been looking at the reasons to hope, the reasons to actually go deeper in our faith, the reasons to live, to submit, to love, and to witness. And today we're going to look at 3 reasons for us to have self-denial. So first of all, we need to have self-denial in order to experience life the way that God intends it. That's the best way to experience this. It's to follow the example of Jesus. And his attitude of imitating in all situations is worthy of us to actually copy. And Peter begins the section in verse 1 by saying, "Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin." Now, the key verb here is arm yourselves, and that is actually a military term. And Peter's communicating that Christians can't just be casual about sin, but that we actually need to take a militant attitude toward it, because it is a mortal enemy that's out to destroy us. But everything inside of us tends to think, well, maybe if I can sin in moderation then, and not to excess, then maybe that's okay. So we spend our time always comparing ourselves to the people that we think are less spiritual than we are, the people that we think sin more than we do. But in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5:22, the Apostle Paul said this. He said, "And stay away from everything that is evil." There was an old country preacher who said, if you don't intend to go into the house, then stay off the porch. And that's so true. But we spend our time trying to get as close to the edge as we possibly can. A young couple that are dating, they'll wonder, how far can we go before it's too far? The business person will say, everybody exaggerates a little bit on their expense accounts. What's wrong with me doing that? Or the women's group that becomes more of a gossip network that says, we're just catching up on the news in the neighborhood. I had to call my mother on this one time. And the late Paul Harvey, he said, sin always starts out being fun, But the way to experience life to the fullest is to arm ourselves with when we do that, we'll be avoiding the evil desires because they're wrong, but also because they rob life of its vitality. And when I think of self-denial, my mind goes to the Garden of Eden, and then even further along into the Garden of Gethsemane. When Jesus is there, he's down on his knees, and he's praying that God would lift this cup from him. And that cup of suffering was actually his death on the cross. But then he came to the realization, and this is what he said, "Not my will, but your will be done." So if there ever was a reason for self-denial, that would be it. So here's the definition of self-denial. Not my will, Lord, but your will be done. But people will object and say, but if I do that, if I deny myself, I'll be miserable. Well, that's up to you. If you have an attitude like Christ, you won't. I have been referred to amongst our elders as the ultimate servant. And the reason I got that name is because we go on an annual retreat. Was that a... That wasn't intended as a guffaw. Okay, that's my daughter. I can address her. But, so we go on retreats, and we will rent maybe an Airbnb or something like that. And I always take the worst room, the one that doesn't have its own bathroom. And then sometimes if we don't have enough rooms for everybody to have their own room, then James and I will share a room together. And the one time I did stand up and take the master suite, it was during COVID, so we got this house really inexpensively. So I took the king-size bed, there was an ensuite shower and everything, but I didn't feel good in there, so I went back to my normal after that. But you have to remember that happiness isn't the goal, obedience is. And if you deny yourself, you'll be happy as a result. And in the long run, you'll actually respect yourself, and you'll have disciplined your desires. And the other result will be other people will respect you because of the way in which you put others first. No wonder Jesus said, I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly, or which is to the fullest measure. So evidently it's possible to do both, to deny self and have an abundant life. In fact, perhaps Jesus and Peter are saying the way to get most of life is to actually do it through self-denial, pouring yourself into others and into the Lord and taking the attention off yourself. And such a paradox, it produces joy. Just ask one of the volunteers that we have at our local food bank. They're there. They're pouring their lives into the families that are food insecure, and they come to that food bank every Tuesday morning. Or we could then also talk to the individual who attends a support group in order to overcome a nagging problem which just plagues her over and over again. And through the accountability and encouragement of that group, she is able to keep that in check. She is able to deny herself when she's tempted. So talk about a joy following all those times of denial. So in Matthew 16, Jesus said, then he said to his followers, if people want to follow me, they must give up the things they want. They must be willing even to give up their lives to follow me. Those who want to save their lives will give up true life, and those who give up their lives for me will have true life. So there's what the true life is all about, when we give up ourselves, when we put other people first. I had another ministry prior to here, back in 1983 to 88. And the first person I baptized there was an 88-year-old man by the name of Pearlie Este. And he approached me and he said that on and off for years he had been wrestling with this decision, and he was now ready. And it was wintertime, and we didn't have a baptistry in the little rural church I was in, so we went into Fredericton, New Brunswick, to the city church to use their baptistry. And it was actually smaller than ours, and it was all steel. And I had to stand in behind, so I baptized him. And then we were walking downstairs to get changed, and he started crying. And I first of all thought, did I bump his head on the side of that steel tank? So I asked him, I said, I'm so happy for you. What's wrong? And he looked at me and he said, I am too, but I just wish I had done this years ago. And I said, that doesn't matter now. What matters is that you did, that you have accepted Christ. And that's true. But as I helped him get dressed and helped him put on his shoes, I couldn't help but think, if he had made that commitment in the prime of his life, I was thinking, just imagine the difference that would have made in his family. So I don't know about you, but I don't want to get to the end of my life and then look back and have regrets because of something that I wanted to do, but I didn't do. What would have been that ripple effect if you acted? So make your life count for something and do it now. Don't wait. There's another reason that we want to look at this self-denial, and that's because this will enable us to experience eternity the way God intends. And Peter takes a moment here to just kind of remind the Christians to leave their past in the past. And he's picking up in verse 3. In the past, you wasted too much time doing what non-believers enjoy. You were guilty of sexual sins, evil desires, drunkenness, wild and drunken parties, and hateful idol worship. So Peter is probably writing to Gentile Christians here, the non-Jews, and this is a different list than he would have used when he was writing to the Jewish Christians. Because the Jewish Christians, they would have had this list of legalistic things that they were dealing with, all along the lines of self-righteousness, as opposed to these sins of rebellion that he's talking about here. Now, in God's eyes, both of them are wrong, whether they're sins of the flesh or sins of the spirit. And then in verse 4, he said, non-believers think it strange that you do not do the many wild and wasteful things they do, so they insult you. And that they refers back to the pagans that are mentioned in the previous verse. So the consequences of their choices, it might be liver failure from years and decades of drinking. It might be emphysema from years of smoking. It could be sexually transmitted diseases from carefree lifestyle. It could be ulcers due to ambition that is just out of control. But the irony is the world thinks that we've missed out on something. I remember a college student saying this to me back when I was attending Mount Allison University. He said, "Oh, you missed a great party last night. We partied until 3 a.m. And then I said to him, and what were you doing at 3:30? Well, I was on the floor in the bathroom in the dorm. I had vomited all over myself and passed out. And I said, yeah, I missed a great party. It sounded like it was such a good time. But the world thinks that all those activities are normal and that we're odd if we don't get involved in them. So people thought that of Christians back in the first century. John MacArthur pointed out this. He said, ancient sources, both Christian and non-Christian, provide ample evidence that it was Christians' reluctance to participate in many conventionally accepted amusements and ungodly civic ceremonies, and their refusal to engage in idolatrous, immoral actions that caused unbelievers to hate and revile them. That led to unjust persecution and suffering for righteousness' sake. So since the Christians balked at unchristian behavior, they wouldn't let poor Christians join in all their pagan games. And that's basically what was going on. Because the Christians didn't get involved with that, the people didn't want anything to do with them. So Peter is saying, don't put too much weight in their words and don't seek revenge. God will judge and they'll have to give an account to him. Have you ever heard people give a testimony, and in their testimony, they make it almost appear as if self-denial is unappealing, whereas self-indulgence looks very appealing. And they'll share all the sordid details of their life prior to becoming a Christian, almost as if they're proud of them. But then they end by saying, "But I gave it all up to follow Jesus." Who can forget the Old Testament character of Solomon? The guy literally had it all. He was the richest man in the world. He had hundreds of women that he could choose from. He had the best food to indulge in. He was the most powerful man in the land. And yet he concludes the book of Ecclesiastes by saying, it's meaningless. It's all meaningless. It's in vain compared to knowing God. And then he said, it's like chasing after the wind. It's just impossible to catch. And Peter drives home the reality for those who've accepted Christ when he says this in verse 5. But they will have to explain this to God, who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this reason, the good news was preached to those who are now dead, even though they were judged like all people. The good news was preached to them so they could live in the Spirit as God lives. The time is near when all things will end, so think clearly and control yourselves so you will be able to pray. Someday we are going to stand before the God of the universe, the one that made this world. And can you just imagine that? To be able to have all creation obey your every command, to be able to say, hurricane, stop, or to say to mountain, just step aside. I can't even get my family to listen to me. And we, looking in Hebrews 9:27, the writer said, just as everyone must die once and then be judged. And we don't talk about final judgment very much these days, but it's very real. And another translation actually says that we have to give account. And that's a term that refers to a business review. But judgment is much more than a year-end financial review that we go through. It's actually a life-end personal activity audit. So is there any area of your life, any area that you would be embarrassed to give an account to God about if your life was to end right at this moment? So the world is coming to a day when the scriptures tell us that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And your name is either written in the book of life or it's not written in that book. And in heaven, you won't be able to have a write-in campaign in order to get your name in that book. There's more to life that can be squeezed between two dates, the date of your birth and the date of your death, and that is an eternity. So you have the opportunity on a daily basis to deny yourself, to take up your cross and follow Christ. And you can let the world know who your loyalty is to, that it's to the Lord, and that judgment is coming, and the world needs to know whose side you're on. The third reason for self-denial is to experience community the way God intends. Now, this section was actually earmarked for Christians, and it tells these early believers what should be taking place in the life of the church. So we're in verse 8 now. Most importantly, love each other deeply. So we are to be a loving community. And the church is to be a positive exception in our world. The church is to stand out and be so different from everybody else in the communities that we live in. And over again, I'm blown away by the love that I see displayed by the people in this congregation. In my early years here, if someone was sick or in need or had lost a family member, I had to be there. I was the only person available. But now I see people's discipleship groups showing up. I go to visit someone at the hospital, and there's already this crowd of people there. I can just go and work on a message or visit with somebody else. So it's incredible to see that. And now I shouldn't be surprised, because that's the church being the church. And then we are also to be a forgiving community. Peter said, because love covers over a multitude of sins. An insightful person once said, we are most like an animal when we kill. We are most like men when we judge. We are most like God when we forgive. And God has forgiven us of so much. We cannot then turn around and look at someone who has done something wrong to us and not be willing to forgive them. We've got to forgive them if we expect God to forgive us. And then we're also to be a welcoming community. Open your homes to each other without complaining. So it's looking out for the needs of others. And there are so many things we could do to show the love of Christ by being more welcoming. And it's doing it without complaining. Hospitality is a compound word in the original language, and it means to love strangers. And even though we're a middle-sized church about to become a large church, we can make it feel much smaller when we take a genuine interest in those who are new to us. But let me share with you the setting that Peter is talking to when he's writing these words. When he says, open your homes to each other without complaining. He's not talking about going to your neighbors and inviting them over to your house for a barbecue and then to play a game of Scrabble, although there's nothing wrong with that, and it's important for us to do that. But at this specific time, Christians were experiencing incredible persecution. They were being locked out of their homes and put onto the street. So what he's saying here is, if you still have your home, then, and you are to invite that family of 5 into your home so that they will have a roof over their house, over their heads, and do it without complaining. So there might be a 2-room house, and there's already 5 people in that house, and another family of 5. And Peter's saying, you invite that other family into your home and do it without complaining. That's difficult to do. It's difficult to be welcoming and deny yourself for the long haul. And then he said that we're to be a serving community. Each of you has received a gift to use to serve others. Be good servants of God's various gifts of grace. So various gifts of grace actually means multicolored. And sometimes we get gift envy. We'll see the way that she sings or the way that he leads, and we wish we could sing like her or lead like him. But if we all had the same color of gifts, then we wouldn't be this beautiful mosaic, this beautiful rainbow we call the church. So we need every gift. And we don't think that any contribution is unnecessary or too small. Because there are some that get a lot of the attention because they are up front. But there are others working in the background doing things that if they weren't doing them, the system wouldn't work for us on Sundays. So we need you. The late Tom Landry, he said, the job of a coach is to make men do what they don't want to do so they can be what they've always wanted to be. And we talk about becoming a part of a discipleship group here in our church, but we also talk about the next step after that, which is to get involved in serving here at the church, because we don't want you to miss out on God's blessings. We need you. So Peter is coaching Christians to get out of their comfort zone and serve others. So in verse 11, he said, anyone who speaks should speak words from God. Anyone who serves should serve with the strength God gives, so that in everything God will be praised through Jesus Christ. Power and glory belong to him forever and ever. Amen. So true community takes place when people come together and use their giftedness, and they focus on God rather than on self. Rick Warren said, God gave you a gift, not for you, but for me. And God gave me a gift, not for me, but for you. And if you don't use your gift, you are robbing me. And if I don't use my gift, I am robbing you. So only when you deny yourself and you serve others are you fully into a relationship with Jesus Christ. In his book, Love Beyond Reason, John Ortberg tells this story, and you might have heard this story before, because a man by the name of Robert Roberts, he wrote about a fourth grade class where the teacher introduced a game called the balloon stomp. And a balloon was tied to every child's ankle, and then the object of the game was to pop everybody else's balloon, but keep your balloon inflated. And the concept was, if I win, you lose. Anyone else's success diminishes my chances. I must regard everyone else as someone to overcome, someone to actually be rooted against. So Balloon Stomp began with its usual way. It was survival of the fittest. And these 9-year-olds entered into this vigorously. Balloons were relentlessly targeted and destroyed. A few of the children kind of shyly tried to hide along the side of the room and maybe be overlooked, but their balloons were doomed as well. And the battle was over just in a matter of seconds, and only one balloon was still inflated. And of course, that owner was the most disliked kid in the room. So it's hard to really win at Balloon Stomp. But then Roberts writes, an interesting thing happened. A second class was brought into the room to play the same game, only this time it was a class of mentally challenged children. And they too were each given a balloon. It was tied around their ankle, and they were told the same instructions, and the same signal began the game. But this time, the game proceeded differently because the instructions were given too quickly to be grasped well by these children. And in all the confusion, the one idea that actually sank in was all the balloons were to be popped. So instead of fighting each other off, these children got the idea that they're supposed to help one another to pop these balloons. So one girl got down and she held her balloon on the floor, just like a quarterback will hold the football for the place kicker to kick a field goal or a convert. And then a boy stomped on the balloon, and then he got down and he held his balloon on the floor so she could stomp on it. And they had this basically a stomping line going, and it was not too long before everybody's balloon had been popped. And then everybody cheered, everybody won. And the question is, who got the game right and who got the game wrong? If the church is truly a loving, forgiving, welcoming, and serving community, it will be much more about cooperation than it will be about competition. And it will be more about Christ and less about us. It will be more about self-denial and less about self-promotion. Years ago, James Calvert went as a missionary to a cannibalistic area in the Fiji Islands. And the captain of the ship that was carrying him and his team there, he was trying to get him to turn back by saying, "You will lose your life and the lives of those with you if you go among such a people." But his reply well demonstrated the cost of commitment. And he said, "We died before we even came here." Jesus said, "If you would come after me, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me." And that happens when you experience life and community and eternity the way he intended. And it's tough to really live if you're not prepared to die to that old way of life. So it's decision time. You can make a decision today that could affect how your life plays out for all eternity. And Jesus invites you to deny yourself, to take up your cross and follow him. You can do that today.